the time you've all been waiting for. We have an introduction of our speaker, a speaker who I first met when my family traveled to Washington, D.C., and he graciously took the time out of his schedule to come and see and meet me and my family. And he told me then he had never been to Oklahoma, but he would love an opportunity to come. And I said, well, consider yourself invited. He is here. We thank God for those who worked to assist us in getting him here. We thank God for Sister McIntyre and Michael Whalen. We thank God for all of those on his campaign staff, Sister Kristen. We thank God for the wonderful tour that was done today by Christine Chief. We thank God so much for the presence of Reverend Dr. Mrs. Joy Crutcher. Amen. Who are still mourning the loss of their son and Dr. Crutcher's twin brother. And still, as Greenwood has not received justice, the family of Crutcher still have yet to receive justice. And that is an indictment that 100 years later, black people can still be killed, broad daylight, and still to this day, you can get away with it. Yep. So what does that say about our culture, our community? That to this day, we have not received reparations. And to this day, we can have families that have lost their son and brother and not receive justice. And some of you may forget or get over it, but I can't get over stuff like that. I'm not built like that. I'm not built like that. And I'm thankful that they find time to do what they do. And the speaker, this introduction we have comes from a beautiful young lady who is a gifted student at Emerson Montessori School. And we are so thankful to have her. She's, I know, a little nervous. She reminds me of myself. Before I speak, I drink about a gallon of water to calm my nerves. Thank God it's water and not some other cold beverage. That's for another time. But I thank God for these preachers here, my elder and her husband. Graylee Pickens, come and introduce the United States Senator. You come speak right here. Give her a hand.
To my pastor, Reverend Dr. Robert Richard Allen Turner. To our special guests, members, and friends. My name is Graylee Pickens. I am a 9-year-old student in Tulsa Public Schools, and I am an active member of historic Vernon African Methodist Episcopal Church. My assignment today is to introduce to some and present to others the guest speaker of the hour. He was born April 27, 1969 in Washington, D.C. and raised in Harrington Park, New Jersey. He attended Stanford University where he received a BA in 1991, then a master's degree a year later. He studied abroad at the University of Oxford before attending Yale Law School. He is a member of the Democratic Party. His passion for civil rights was a major platform when he was elected mayor of Newark, New Jersey in 2006. Eventually, he became one of the nation's most well-known mayors, with his outright detest for injustice and zeal to help his community thrive. This man is truly one of the people going above and beyond to enrich the life of the residents in his region. Much of his time before and during his reign as mayor has been spent providing residents with resources and services to help those in need. He also played a significant role as a mayor the people could depend on, not only in political matters, but in small things that affect the community as well. He could be found shoveling snow for the elderly. The man has even run into a burning building to save someone. Isn't that something? All facts that earned him the title of Super Mayor. In 1998, after winning a seat on the Municipal Council of Newark, he staged a 10-day hunger strike and briefly lived in a tent to draw attention to urban development issues in the city. In 2013, he became the first African-American senator from New Jersey and represents with pride, still living in his passion for civil rights and activism. In 2019, on the first, not the second, but the first day of Black History Month, he announced his campaign for President of the United States in the 2020 presidential election with his slogan, "Together America, we will rise," a play on words from acclaimed writer Maya Angelou. He chose a building with its own rich history and legacy to be his headquarters for the campaign. It's found on Broad Street, the historic New Jersey Bell Building. But today, ladies and gentlemen, he is here in Tulsa, here to indulge in the rich history of Black Wall Street, here to tour the heritage and culture that is this historic Vernon A.M.E. church. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please stand? I present to you U.S. Senator and 2020 presidential candidate, Cory Booker.
The church say amen. Amen. That there is hope embodied in the spirit of the future that we just heard from. Now, I don't want to use all my time recognizing all those that are here, those who have spoken before me. But I want to be reminded that everyone here, my father watched me get all these degrees from Stanford, Oxford, Yale, and he looked at me and said, "Boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot." Life ain't about the degrees you get. It's about the love and the service you give. Even my mama, when I was going to be sworn in as a United States Senator on the Senate floor by the then Vice President Joe Biden, and my mom took me to see John Lewis. She wanted that the last thing to be before I swore my oath. And I walked away. My mom lectured me all the way from John Lewis's office to be sworn in, and she's like, "Boy, don't you forget where you came from. Don't you forget the struggles and the sacrifices it took to get you here as the fourth ever popularly elected African American to the Senate in our history." And she reminded me then, she said it very plainly, she goes, "Boy, never forget that the title doesn't make the man. Man must make the title." So instead of reading off the list of the people here, I just want to say to everyone here who is an activist, not by title, but by deed, to everyone here who is showing their patriotism, and patriotism is defined as love of country, but you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. To everyone here that knows that love is not a sentiment, but it is a sacrifice, it is service, it is struggle, because if there is no struggle, there is no progress. I want to thank all that are assembled here for your commitment to country, to your commitment to cause. But if you allow me the liberty of singling out one person, I want to single out the pastor of this church. Reverend Dr. Turner. He is appointed but also anointed. He is qualified and certified, but he is also sanctified. And I want to thank him for his leadership. I want to thank him for his light. I want to thank him for the power of his prayer and the purposefulness of his mission. Now, I just want to say this, and then I'm going to get on to my remarks, but, you know, we have we make mistakes in this nation by thinking that we honor men and women by talking about them, by looking back. I see this on Veterans Day. I see this on Martin Luther King Day, where people, you know, we have this, sometimes we like to cover over our history, make it simple. One of my friends calls it the Santa Clausification of King. And forgetting to honor King is not to heap praise upon him, it is to focus on his mission. If we want to honor this man, we must honor his mission. And so before I go any further, we took a collection here, but that's not enough. His mission is to make sure this edifice, make sure the resurrection of this building, the security of its treasure that is under assault by time and under assault by purposeful, what they called urban renewal, when they cut through African American communities from New Haven to Newark, from Tulsa to Washington, D.C., destroying black communities by deciding to run their urban renewal plans right through neighborhoods. And now this church is under assault continuously. And this man is trying to preserve that. And more than that, he is trying to make sure that as we go around this country and see memorials, he wants to make sure that right here on this knoll here, that we build a remembrance, a recognition of those who struggled and died and fought in one of the ugliest chapters of American history. So I want to say right now and challenge some folk who will join with me and give some more. I'm not a man of great means, but I want to say right now I'm going to pledge $1,000 to both the Blessing of the Basement campaign that we just took a collection and the Black Wall Street Memorial at Vernon right here. And I don't want to be alone. I want someone else. Take out their checkbook. Go onto the church website. Don't honor the man, honor his mission. Because we have work to do. Now, I'm a man that had a tough decision to make in my life, whether to go to law school or go to divinity school, and the devil won out. So allow me today to try to have some spiritual restitution and stand in the pulpit as a man of faith, but who is not sanctified or qualified or certified. I want to preach to you today from Genesis, chapter 37, verse 19. And I'm preaching from there today because our nation's history is a history of wretchedness and pain. It has a history of contradictions, of bloodshed. We hail our nation, but we do it a disservice if we don't speak to the wretchedness, if we try to cover it over, if we try to create a Disneyification of American history. It is an insult to this nation when we don't tell our truth. I am in pain right now because the pastor, to his wisdom, some of the folks that are here to the wisdom, would not let me ascend into a pulpit until I walked the streets. And as they showed me the pictures of what was and now what is, as they told me the story, they broke up the soul of my soil. I couldn't contain my tears. When they told me history, a man that has fancy degrees in history, but a history I did not fully know. Why is it as a nation that we cover over the wretchedness of our past? Not telling the truth of the middle passage in every classroom in America. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Africans dying in the ocean. Average cargo lost 25% of the human beings on those ships thrown over the water, dead bodies. And we don't tell the truth of the savageness of slavery, the torture, the mutilation. We don't tell the truth of the post-Reconstruction period. God bless my brother Brian Stevenson, who just in Alabama created a memorial to the lynchings that went on, that strange fruit where thousands and thousands of Americans were slain by the largest periods of terrorism our nation has ever seen. We don't tell the truth about the forced castrations of African Americans. We don't tell the truth of the studies of injections of African Americans with diseases by scientists like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
That's right.
We don't tell the truth of our history enough. And it weakens our very being when we don't tell the truth of our history, because the greatness of this country isn't that we have been bereft of violence and torture and terrorism on our own soil. The greatness of our nation lies in the fact that we overcame that. That every generation did not give up. That they kept fighting. That they kept working. They kept struggling. They kept moving on despite unimaginable pain. And I felt the pain as I touched the scarred and charred bricks of a great community where people from all over this southern part of our nation sojourned here to find a promised land, and they did. A community that thrived, where black journalists and black educators and black business people formed a thriving American town. It was a light of glory and promise, but then was torched and burned. Dashing the dreams. Genesis 37:19 says, the words of Joseph's brothers, the evil words that they uttered when they saw Joseph walking in the distance, a dreamer himself. And they uttered the words, they said, behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream. I want to tell you, they grabbed Joseph and they threw him into a pit to die. But the power of the story is that he did not perish in the pit. He rose on up despite the wretchedness and violence of brother upon brother. He rose on up despite the desires to kill and destroy. He rose on up and led a nation through darkness and despair to salvation. Now, you might find it interesting that if we were to go to the Lorraine Motel, one of America's greatest dreamers who never lost his faith in who we are, one of America's greatest dreamers that 56 years ago yesterday stood on the mall of our nation and did not candy coat the truths of our country, but he called to them. He said, we are assembled here because of a promissory note. A nation that was founded in contradiction. This country that broke with the course of human events, the oldest constitutional democracy on the planet Earth. Our nation said that we would not be founded on blood and soil. We are not here because we share a common faith, or we are not a nation because we share a common ethnicity. Our imperfect geniuses, our founders, said that we would declare that this nation is one of virtue. We became a country because of the highest ideals of humanity. We are a nation that talked about equality, that talked about justice, that talked about freedom. But the contradiction of our country is in those very documents. They spoke to the very opposite. Native Americans were referred to as savages. Women were second-class citizens. African Americans, slavery enshrined. Blacks, 3/5 of human beings. That contradiction is at the very source of our nation and the story of America. has been the story of Black Americans and white Americans and brown Americans joining together to try to deal with that contradiction, to overcome the pain and the hurt and the suffering that was at the result of that contradiction. We are here because of the folks that never gave up on the dream of America. Langston Hughes said it in his poetry. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, but yet must be, the land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. Oh, yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. Generation after generation of Americans joining together in broader and broader coalitions called to the conscience of our country, from Susan B. Anthony, who stood up and says, it was we the people, not we the white male citizens, but we the people who made this nation, who overcame that wretchedness, who overcame that pain and kept pursuing our ideals. And King, the dreamer, stood on the mall 56 years ago yesterday. My mama was on that mall with the Urban League helping to organize that march. I grew up with stories of that march. My mom and dad reminded me I am here today because of those civil rights activists. It was a white man on a couch in 1965 watching TV, a program most of America was watching back then because we only had 3 channels in those days. They were watching a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg. And this white man is watching that movie, and they broke away to show a bridge in Alabama. And these marchers trying to go from Selma to Montgomery stopped on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and a white man on a couch watched as those marchers were beaten savagely, bloody Sunday, and he didn't just sit there and do nothing. This white man got up and said, I can't afford a plane ticket to Alabama. I can't close my business one day. I'm struggling to make it for my family, but I am an American. Patriotism is about love, about common cause and common struggle, and I understand that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that man gets up and says, I may not be able to do everything, but I'm going to do something. I'm not going to surrender my power. I'm going to do the best I can with what I have where I am. And he starts working in 1965 to help with housing discrimination and Black families being denied homes in the neighborhoods that surrounded him in his county, being denied over and over again. He organized other folks, mostly white folks, to fight for this. And then they finally, he said it became 1969, and he got this case file, and it was 2 names on it. The names were Cory and Carolyn Booker. They were my parents. I grew up in New Jersey. My family moved to New Jersey because one man didn't sit on a couch, he got up. We are here, not because of who presidents were, not because of who Congress people were. We're here because Americans accepted the responsibility to deal with that wretchedness and pain, that inequality and inequity. Of people who stood up and said the virtues of our nation are not just to be said in our songs and our pledges, but we have an obligation to deal with that now. We live in a distraught present still, where there is too much of an impotency of empathy. We live in a nation now where we have people trying to divide us against ourselves. We live in a nation right now where partisanship and divides are being activated and accelerated, and the historic hates in our communities is on a rise. Since 9/11, the majority of our terrorist attacks in America have not been international terrorists from abroad trying to destroy our country. It's been terrorists from within trying to destroy this nation. The majority of our terrorist attacks have been right-wing extremist groups. The majority of them, white supremacist groups. This hatred in our communities is real. The terror is real. But the systemic legacy of hatred is also seen in the institutional discrimination that we still fight. We still live in a nation where the legacy of our divisions, the legacy of the violence in communities like this can still be seen. Discrimination and written into our laws where African Americans were denied, who went over and fought for our freedoms in every war we've ever been in, but then came home and found laws from the GI Bill to Social Security written in ways that denied African Americans wealth. We are communities where redlining and mortgage disinvestment destroyed towns and communities, where urban renewal was subjected upon communities. We live in a nation where the legacy of those divisions is manifest even in our criminal justice system, where implicit racial bias sees so many of our children being killed, unarmed children being shot down, and for every name we know, Tamir Rice or Eric Gardner, there are thousands that we don't know because it was not caught on videotape. We live in a nation where the absurdity, we hail to be the land of the free, but we incarcerate more people than any country on the globe. We are 5% of the globe's population, but 1 out of every 4 incarcerated people on the planet Earth are right here in our nation. 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are right here in our nation. And in our prisons, we do things that most civil rights activists, most human rights activists call torture. Putting children in solitary confinement, shackling pregnant women. But yet this criminal justice system, it targets some communities more than others. People with mental illness and addiction don't get treatment and health care, they get jail and prison. We have a sexual assault to prison pipeline nobody talks about, but almost 90% of the women who are incarcerated are survivors of sexual violence. And we know right now we live in a country where for nonviolent drug offenses, we had more marijuana arrests in 2017 than all violent crimes combined. That means there are people in our jails and prisons right now having their lives destroyed, life sentences, because even when they get out of jail, they now can't get a job, can't get a loan from a bank, can't get public housing. We now have people literally in prison for doing things that 2 of our last 3 presidents admitted to doing. And that history of racism, in a systematic way, it rears its head in a criminal justice system that overwhelmingly has incarceration because of the drug war, but we know there's no difference in America, 0 difference between blacks and whites and Latinos for using drugs or dealing drugs. But if you're African American, you're almost 4 times more likely to be arrested and jailed for those, which puts us in almost a full circle distraught moment where in America today we have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. I want you to know right now, we have work to do in our nation. The dream is under assault. If you go where King was slain, it's those words from Genesis that they wrote right there, not a tribute to a man, but a call to a people. It says right there, where King was slain, behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream. Now, I want you to know that Martin Luther King called upon us to be engaged in our nation. He said what we have to repent for in this day and age is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. Let me be very pointed. Let me be very pointed in this. I get a little upset when I hear the absurd debates going on. Is he or is he not a racist? That is not the important question. The important question is, does racism and white supremacy exist in America? And if it exists in America, the question is he or isn't he a racist? The question is, are you doing something about racism and white supremacy, or are you not? Because there is no neutrality in the cause of justice. Because the opposite of justice is not injustice, it's inaction, it's apathy, and it's indifference. And for those of you who think that there's some separation between our values and our virtues, between our churches and our religious institutions, and the civic space of politics, you don't know our history. Dr. King, and I'll quote him right now, he said that it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. Right now, in our civic spaces, we have to fight to make sure that the injustices of the past that still manifest themselves today in disparities between rich and poor, disparities between black and white, that we are called to engage in the civic processes that can ensure that we have restorative justice. Because the inequalities in our country are not getting better. So many cases are getting worse. And the inequality is rife throughout our country. We should not be in a nation where the quality of education you get is determined by the zip code in which you live. You can't be a nation of equality if you are not a nation of education, equality of opportunity. You can't be a nation that preaches the values in our civic space of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if health care is not a right for every American. How can you have a life without health care? This is our civic gospel. These are the words we have. We cannot live in a nation where we leave the planet Earth in maternal mortality. And black women even have 4 times the rate of maternal mortality than white women. Health care is a civil rights issue. We live in a country where this moment is a moral moment. It is not a partisan moment.
That's right.
That's why I was so happy to hear previous speakers talk to us. Because even as a Democrat, I want you to know, I go to your senator's office, Inhofe, and I pray with him in Bible study. Pastor, I'd like to say to you, I go every week, but sometimes I miss, Pastor. We are called to love each other, not to hate each other just because we vote different. I tell Democrats everywhere I go, in this moral moment, stop talking about what you're against and start talking about what you're for. I want to talk to Democrats and tell them the call is not to beat Republicans, it's to unite Americans in common cause and common purpose. This is not a partisan fight. It is a moral moment. Now y'all gotta understand, I know that some people in here feel some kind of way. You turn on the TV, you go to sleep watching Rachel, and she's got you all upset. I know some of y'all. And there might be some folks on here watch a different channel, letting themselves get upset by somebody else. But never let darkness make you dark. Never let hate make you hate. You are called to be light. You are called to be loved. I'm running to a town hall in Iowa. Big guys, I'm about to jump on the stage, sees me, former tight end for Stanford University, former All-American football player, pastor. The older I get, the better I was. And the man puts his arm around me, big dude, says to me, dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I didn't miss a beat. I look at him and I go, dude, that's a felony, man. Come on now. There is not a elevated demagogues and bigots and fearmongers to the highest heights in our culture. Every generation has had. The gardens of our democracy have never been free of the weeds of hatred and bigotry, sexism and always. Father Conklin, one of the #1 radio show in America with his preaching of anti-Semitic screeds. We had a whole legitimate political party that rose up. I hear the language of that political party in our current president. It was an anti-immigration party, except for then, it was anti-immigration against German immigrants and Irish immigrants. We had a major senator who dominated our headlines, dominated our dialogue. His name was McCarthy, that every day tried to insinuate fear and divisiveness in our culture. But how did we beat demagogues and bigots and fearmongers in the past? We didn't use their tactics. We didn't fight them on their turf. Did we beat Bull Connor by bringing bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses? No. We beat him with unarmed truth and relentless, fearsome love. We had artists of activism who called to the conscience of our country, who called to the moral imagination of a nation. That's what this moment calls for right now. Not more partisanship, but more unity. Not for people who want to divide, but like our ancestors of old, we are called to put more indivisible into this one nation under God. Because I was taught in my church that unity is the call. Whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is in the midst. I know it from my Hebrew brothers and sisters. In the Hebrew, in the songs of one faith, they say, Ki, Beti, Beit, Tefillah, L'chol, Chomim. May my house be a house of prayer for many nations. We know in the cultures of our country that pluralism, that diversity is not our weakness, it's our strength. And every movement in America succeeded because they created new American majorities for women's rights, for voting rights, for civil rights, for workers' rights. It wasn't one faction of our nation, it was the majority creating a new consciousness in our country. But I want to tell you right now that I'm worried. My generation has to own up the calls of Genesis. What will become of the dream? We have to answer that because the dream is in peril. When we say we're the home of the brave and our veterans come home and they are disproportionately homeless, our dream is in peril. Where millions of seniors in this country live below the poverty line because their Social Security checks are too meager to give them security and dignity in their retirement. We are in the pit right now, and the dream is in danger when there are teachers going to school who see children coming out of poverty and reach in their own pockets to pay for things for their children, even though they don't know how they're going to pay off their student loans. The dream is in peril when Americans, our brothers and sisters, are feeling isolated today. Survivors of sexual assault who believe that their truth won't be heard if they come forward. We're stigmatizing the mentally ill. We're stigmatizing the differently able. We're stigmatizing the addicted. And in communities in our country, we do not even see the violence. In Philadelphia, officers were shot. It made national news, and I was so hurt, I called my friend, an elected leader, and called him to check in. I ran a police force. I know what law enforcement does every day going to work when the assault rifles are out there and the weapons are out there. And I called him out of concern, and he said to me, things that helped to comfort me about the strength and the resiliency and the community outpouring of love for these police officers that were shot. But then he tells me, Cory, this is a tough time this summer because in Philadelphia we've had 8 mass shootings. And I said, I haven't heard about them. And he goes, that's the point, Cory. Why are the lives of some Americans, when they're gunned down, no one talks about them? And even for the Americans we see, when our fellow Americans are gunned down in a concert in Las Vegas, in a nightclub in Orlando, we do nothing. When our children and our brothers and sisters are killed in houses of worship, from a synagogue in Pittsburgh to a church in Charleston, South Carolina, we do nothing. When our children are in classrooms and they're gunned down, child after child, we do nothing. And yet today, this fall, as we send children back to school, the most powerful nation in the land is telling our children, we can't protect you, so when we send you to school, we're going to teach you writing and arithmetic, but we're also going to teach you how to hide and duck for cover. What are we saying about ourselves? I know this nation. I am here because Black American and white American and Christian American and Jewish American, because we stood together and fought together like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, dying in Mississippi together for the dream. So now I want to give you the advice. I walked your streets and I wept. I feel the pain and the hurt. But I got some schooling in my day. And I want to tell you right now, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. Because there is hurt and pain in our country. It has always been the case, but how will we respond? Our past generations taught us when 4 girls died in a church bombing in Birmingham, the whole nation rose up and said, that is not who we are. We changed laws. When women in my grandparents' generation threw themselves out windows to die on the pavement at the shirtwaist factory fire, this nation rose up with compassion and empathy and said, we will change laws, and we changed working conditions and changed workers' rights. And so what are we going to do now when the dream is in the pit? I want to tell you the advice I got, because I may have got my BA at Stanford, but I got my PhD on the streets of Newark, New Jersey. And my greatest professor was a woman named Miss Virginia Jones. In the 80s, her child was slain in the lobby of the projects, but she never left. She taught me that hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. So I want to leave you with her advice to me on one of my most difficult days, where I was surrendering to the seduction of despair. It was in 2004 when I was walking in my neighborhood. I wasn't mayor of the city yet, and climbed the hill with my father who was visiting me, and gunshots rang out. Not an unfamiliar sound in so many of our communities, in a nation where over half the homicide victims in this country are young Black men. And as I go up the hill where the gunfire, I see kids running past me, and off-duty cop follows me, and there it is. Tragically familiar sight in America. A teenage boy with gunshots in his chest. And on that grass, I did everything I could to stop the blood that seemed to be coming from everywhere. I was shaking, I was screaming for the ambulance, I was calling out his name, as in, stay with me, but it was gruesome the way we glorified violence. Foamy blood started pouring from his mouth, and I reached my hand in to try to clear a passageway, hoping he would breathe again, but he did not. The paramedics finally came and shoved me out of the way and ripped open this boy's shirt, and I saw the bullet holes in his chest, but I knew the Lord had taken him.
Mama.
I walked down the hill. I told my dad to go back to the projects. I numbly answered questions to the police. I don't remember how I got home that night, but this I do remember. When my dad opened the door and saw his son covered with another boy's blood, I saw the look on his face, and I couldn't even respond to that. My father, who I was so close to, I didn't want to talk to him. I was filling up. I couldn't. I had to push past him and go into the bathroom. I closed it behind me, and I put my shaking hands in the sink and tried to scrub another boy's blood off my hands. And when I looked up and I saw myself in the mirror, I broke. And for the first time in my life, I felt unrestrained rage. I was so angry at my nation, where millions of us pledge allegiance to a flag and swear an oath of liberty and justice for all. But in my community, where is the justice? I couldn't understand why my nation that had shown such love and empathy and patriotism and sacrifice, how could we let the carnage continue? I got in the shower and turned the water on so hot, hoping that the pain on the outside would numb the pain on the inside. And I went to bed that night fitful and woke up before my dad rose and quickly left the apartment, and I went down in the projects into the lobby, and as I was walking to the lobby, I just had to get out, I just had to get away. I remembered in the back of my mind that in the 80s, this was the lobby that Miss Jones's son was murdered. And she never left. She never gave up. She still fought. And I emerged out of the lobby into the courtyard between the two project buildings, and across the courtyard, there was only one other person early in that morning. Her back was to me. Because if God had put her there, it was Miss Virginia Jones. And she must have heard my inside screaming out, because she turns around suddenly and she sees me and she does the only thing I needed in that moment. She just puts her arms out. And she's only 4 feet and a smidgen. I'm a big man. But I ran through that courtyard like a little child running to his mother. And when I got to her arms, she held me and I held her. And I finally broke and just started crying tears of hurt that people in this room have felt. Tears of pain and grief that still live on the streets around this church. I cried and cried, and she held me, and then she finally spoke. And she only spoke 2 words, and this is what I want to leave you all with. She said 2 words that have nothing to do with religion, but everything to do with our civic, the gospel. She uttered 2 words that I know are the definition of a nation that has come so far, worked so hard with such perfect ideals, but imperfect realities. It's how we persisted through the most difficult times and why we still fight today. There are 2 words she uttered that I said to myself when I eventually became mayor on my toughest days. There are 2 words that I confess I say when I'm in the Senate on the days I feel like I'm banging my head against implacable walls of resistance. And I'm even uttering these 2 words. I was whispering to your pastor about this. I say these 2 words on a campaign trail when I'm getting on 4 planes a day. I'm weary and I'm leaning on the spirit of the great Americans I encounter. And so as I wept there in a project courtyard, this elderly woman, my greatest professor, rubbed my back and said over and over again these 2 words: stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. We have come